When you think about World War II, chances are the first images that come to mind are soldiers storming beaches, tanks rolling through villages, and planes roaring overhead. But behind those iconic scenes was another, quieter battle. One fought not with weapons, but with food. Every soldier, no matter where he served, carried the weight of hunger with him. Feeding millions of men scattered across Europe, Africa, and the Pacific wasn't just a logistical challenge, it was a test of creativity and endurance. Out of necessity, the military designed rations that could survive mud, heat, snow, and months of storage. These meals weren't about taste or comfort, they were about survival. Yet food is never just food. For the men who ate it, each can of beans or slab of spam carried emotions far beyond calories. A tin of pork and beans might stir a memory of Sunday dinners back home. A chocolate bar, if it tasted right, could bring back childhood in an instant. But more often than not, the meals reminded soldiers of what they were missing: soft bread, fresh eggs, hot coffee, the warmth of a family table. What they got instead was practical, portable, and often disappointing. Powdered eggs that looked more like paste than breakfast, canned fruit cakes that resembled bricks, chocolate bars so bitter and dense they were almost inedible. Even the most infamous dish of all, ham and lima beans, turned into a running joke among GIs who swore they'd never touch the combination again once the war was over. Still, as grim as some of these meals were, they kept men alive. They fueled the long marches, the sleepless nights, and the endless battles. They were a daily reminder that war demanded sacrifice not only on the battlefield, but also at the dinner table. And today, these strange rations offer a different kind of history, one told not through strategy and politics, but through flavor, frustration, and the shared humor of survival. In this story, we're not just looking at what soldiers ate. We're looking at how those foods shaped their memories, their morale, and in some cases, their sense of home. Because when you peel back the labels on those old cans and ration boxes, you find something more than food. You find the taste of war itself. 1. Canned pork and beans. It was supposed to be the taste of home in a can. For many American soldiers during World War II, pork and beans became one of the most recognizable meals on the front lines. On paper, it sounded like comfort food. Tender beans simmered with bits of pork, seasoned in a tomato base, and packed into tins that could survive shipping across oceans. In reality, the story was far less appetizing. Canned pork and beans had long been a budget-friendly staple back in America. Families bought it during the Depression because it was cheap, filling, and lasted forever on a pantry shelf. When war came, the US Army saw it as a ready-made solution. Beans provided protein and fiber, pork scraps added fat and flavor, and the whole mixture could be shipped in bulk without fear of spoiling. For generals planning logistics, it was a perfect battlefield food. But for the men who had to eat it day after day, pork and beans soon lost their appeal. What started as a small comfort from home became a dreaded monotony. The beans were often mushy, the sauce too sweet, and the pork barely more than a few fatty chunks floating in orange liquid. Soldiers joked that you could count the actual pieces of pork on one hand. And when the tins were eaten cold, straight from the can under fire, they were even less inviting. There's an emotional sting hidden in this story. Imagine a soldier sitting in the mud of Normandy, spooning out beans that once reminded him of Sunday dinners back home. Instead of nostalgia, the taste only highlighted what he had lost: the warmth of a kitchen, the smell of a stove, the sound of family around the table. What was meant to be comforting turned into a cruel reminder of absence. Some soldiers even swore off beans entirely after the war, unable to stomach them again. Yet pork and beans mattered. They were calorie-dense, reliable, and available when fresh food was impossible to supply. Without them, the US military couldn't have fed millions of troops across Europe and the Pacific. In a strange way, those little cans became part of the American war effort, symbols of both survival and sacrifice. Still, ask any veteran, and you'll hear the same chuckle when pork and beans come up. The taste wasn't something they loved, it was something they endured. And that sense of endurance, of pushing through the bland, the repetitive, and the unappetizing, was as much a part of the war as any battle. From beans in Europe, we moved to another breakfast standby that promised familiarity but delivered disappointment. 2. Powdered eggs breakfast has always been called the most important meal of the day, and during World War II, the U.S. Army tried hard to deliver it, even on the front lines. For soldiers, that meant powdered eggs, a product that promised the comfort of scrambled eggs without the need for chickens, farms, or refrigeration. It was science meeting necessity, but the result was far less appetizing than it sounded. Powdered eggs were created by spray drying liquid eggs into a fine powder. The Army loved them because they weighed almost nothing, lasted for months, and could be shipped anywhere in the world. One can of powder, mixed with water, could produce enough scrambled eggs to feed an entire platoon. On paper, it was brilliant. America's war machine needed efficiency, and powdered eggs seemed like the perfect solution. But when it came time to eat them, soldiers quickly realized these weren't the eggs they remembered from home. Instead of fluffy golden yolks, powdered eggs often turned rubbery and gray when rehydrated with tepid water in field kitchens. The smell was sulfurous, the texture uneven, and the taste somewhere between chalk and cardboard. Many GIs compared them to eating soggy sponges. The emotional impact of this can't be overstated. For a young soldier who grew up on hearty breakfasts, eggs frying in bacon grease, toast on the side, maybe a cup of hot coffee, the powdered version was a pale imitation. It didn't taste like home. It tasted like the absence of home. Letters sent back often poked fun at the Army eggs, but behind the humor was a sense of longing. Mealtime, which should have been a small comfort, became another reminder of distance and loss. Still, powdered eggs mattered. They provided essential protein when fresh food wasn't available. They fueled soldiers through long marches, sleepless nights, and exhausting combat. Even if they weren't loved, they were endured, and endurance was what kept men going across Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. In a way, every bite of those rubbery eggs symbolized sacrifice, not just for the soldiers who ate them, but for the farmers, scientists, and families back home who helped make sure it kept arriving. After the war, powdered eggs didn't completely disappear. They remained a pantry item in the 1950s and even made their way into emergency kits. But for the men who lived through World War II, they carried an unforgettable memory: the taste of war packaged in a scoop of yellow powder. And if the eggs weren't enough to test a soldier's patience, another canned creation would truly define the wartime diet. Few foods left such a lasting mark on America's memory as the next item. 3. Spam overload. If there's one food most associated with the American soldier's plate in World War II, it's Spam. That pink gelatinous block of canned pork became both a symbol of survival and the butt of countless jokes. For some, it was a miracle meat that kept hunger at bay. For others, it was a nightmare in a tin that haunted their taste buds long after the war ended. Spam had been introduced by Hormel in 1937, just a few years before the war began. Made from pork shoulder, ham, salt, and preservatives, it was cheap, filling, and most importantly, shelf-stable. When the U.S. entered the war, the Army seized on Spam as a ready-made ration. It didn't require refrigeration, it could be shipped across the world, and it could be served in dozens of ways. Soldiers fried it, boiled it, ate it cold, or mixed it into stews. The government bought more than 150 million pounds of Spam during the war, feeding not only American troops but also Allied armies. At first, it felt like a blessing. Spam was hearty, high in calories, and easy to cook. But after weeks and months of Spam-filled meals, soldiers began to revolt, at least in spirit. They joked about Spam being served 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. Some units made up acronyms for it, calling it something posing as meat, or Special Army Meat. For men used to the variety of home cooking, the endless repetition turned what was once a novelty into a punishment. Emotionally, Spam carried a strange double meaning. On one hand, it represented American ingenuity and abundance. While much of Europe faced starvation, American soldiers had tins of protein stacked high. On the other hand, the sheer monotony of it reminded soldiers that war was not just about fighting, it was about enduring. Imagine opening your ration tin and seeing the same block of pale pink meat day after day while remembering the taste of Sunday roasts or fried chicken back home. Spam was food, but it wasn't comfort. Yet, Spam's impact outlasted the war. In places like Hawaii, Guam, and the Philippines, where it was distributed by U.S. forces, it became a beloved staple, integrated into local cuisines. Back in America, some veterans swore off it forever, while others kept a can or two in the pantry, almost as a reminder of what got them through. Love it or hate it, Spam had written itself into the story of the American soldier. And while Spam may have been filling, the Army also packed something meant to be a quick pick me up. Number 4. K-ration chocolate bars. When most people think of chocolate, they imagine sweetness, comfort, and a small piece of happiness. But for American soldiers in World War II, chocolate came in a very different form. It was packed into K-rations, not as a treat, but as a calculated weapon of nutrition. The Army's goal wasn't pleasure, it was survival. These bars, officially called the D ration, or included in K rations, were designed by Army scientists to provide maximum calories in the smallest size. They were made with cocoa, sugar, oat flour, and a large dose of powdered milk. But here's the catch. They were deliberately formulated to taste just unpleasant enough that soldiers wouldn't eat them unless they truly needed the energy. In other words, this wasn't chocolate for enjoyment. It was chocolate as medicine. The results were shocking. Instead of a smooth, sweet Hershey's bar, soldiers bit into something dense, chalky, and bitter. In the field, the bars often hardened into near bricks, making them difficult to chew. Some GIs joked that you could break a tooth on one. Others compared them to flavored soap. Under the hot sun of the Pacific, the bars would soften into a sticky mess. In the cold of Europe, they were nearly impossible to bite into. For soldiers, this was a cruel twist. Chocolate back home had been a childhood treat, a symbol of joy and normalcy. To open a wrapper in the middle of war and find not delight but disappointment carried an emotional sting. What should have been comfort became another reminder of the sacrifices war demanded. Some men admitted to trading or tossing the bars altogether, preferring to go without rather than choke one down. And yet, the chocolate bars mattered. They provided quick energy on forced marches, during long nights in foxholes, or when regular meals weren't possible. In moments of desperation, soldiers swallowed their pride and their bitter rations because survival came first. Ironically, these inedible chocolate bars probably saved countless lives. After the war, veterans laughed about them, calling them emergency jawbreakers or the world's cruelest candy. Hershey's would later refine the formula into better tasting military bars, but the wartime version left a permanent mark on memory. It was proof that in war, even something as sweet as chocolate could lose its innocence. And if the chocolate bar disappointed, the next item. 5. Tropical fruitcake cans. Fruitcake has always been a curious dessert. Back home, it was a holiday tradition. Dense, sweet, studded with dried fruit and nuts, often saved for Christmas tables. But for American soldiers in World War II, fruitcake arrived in the most unexpected form, sealed inside a tin can and shipped to the front lines. On paper, it was meant to be a special treat. In practice, it was one of the strangest foods to land in a mess kit. The U.S. Army introduced canned fruitcake as a way to give soldiers something that felt festive, even in the middle of war. Because it was dense, high in calories, and loaded with preserved fruit, it kept well during long voyages overseas. For men stationed in the Pacific, the Army even developed tropicalized fruitcake, a version designed to withstand intense heat and humidity without spoiling. It was meant as a morale booster, a sweet reminder of home during holidays spent far away. But the reality was less heartwarming. Soldiers often found the fruitcake soggy from condensation inside the can, with sticky chunks of fruit that had melted into a gluey paste. In the tropical heat, the dessert sometimes took on a strange fermented flavor. What should have been a slice of Christmas joy turned into a cloying, sticky mess. Some men ate it reluctantly. Others traded it away. More than a few tossed it into the nearest ditch. The emotional contrast was painful. Imagine being a young soldier, opening your holiday ration on Christmas Eve, hoping for something familiar, and finding a lump of dense, syrupy cake that tasted nothing like the family recipe you grew up with. Instead of comfort, it brought frustration, and sometimes even a laugh at how far from homey the Army's version of dessert could be. Still, the canned fruitcake had its purpose. It provided quick sugar and energy, which soldiers desperately needed during long campaigns. And for a few, just the idea of having cake in a combat zone was enough to bring a smile, even if the flavor didn't match the memory. Some soldiers even used it as a trading tool, swapping cans of fruitcake for cigarettes, coffee, or anything more practical. After the war, canned fruitcake became one of those quirky memories soldiers never forgot. For many, it cemented fruitcake's reputation as the most unwanted dessert in America. But for others, it stood as a strange reminder of how the Army tried, however awkwardly, to bring a taste of home to men who were so far away. And if the sticky sweetness of fruitcake was easy to mock, 6. Sea ration ham and lima beans. Among all the food served to American soldiers in World War II, one dish earned the crown as the most hated of them all: ham and lima beans. Officially part of the sea ration menu, it quickly gained infamy across every branch of the military. Soldiers cursed it, mocked it, and gave it a nickname that said it all: ham and mo. On paper, this ration made sense. Ham provided protein and fat, while lima beans added bulk, fiber, and carbohydrates. Mixed together in a tomato-based sauce, it was supposed to be hearty, filling, and nutritionally complete. The Army's food planners saw it as a balanced, cost-effective meal that could be canned and shipped anywhere. But the reality was brutal. Soldiers opening a can of ham and lima beans were greeted with a greasy, pale mixture of fatty pork chunks swimming alongside soggy beans. The texture was mushy, the smell was uninviting, and the flavor left much to be desired. Many soldiers swore that the beans tasted metallic, as if they had absorbed the very flavor of the tin. Others complained that the ham was mostly fat, with little meat worth chewing. The emotional reaction was intense. Food in war could sometimes be a rare comfort, but when the can-marked ham and lima beans came out, comfort disappeared. Soldiers dreaded it so much that some left the cans behind altogether, refusing to eat them even when hungry. Others used them for barter, trading them away for cigarettes, candy, or almost any other ration available. A few men even joked that the Army must have designed it on purpose, as punishment. Still, even the despised ham and mo had its role. It kept soldiers alive. In desperate times, men choked it down because survival demanded it. And in a strange way, the shared hatred of the dish became a unifying experience. Decades later, veterans could laugh about it together, recalling how entire companies groaned whenever those cans appeared in the mess line. Ham and lima beans became more than just a meal. It became a symbol of the soldier's endurance, of finding humor even in misery. Some men swore they never touched lima beans again after returning home, the memory too strong to overcome. Yet others kept the story alive, telling younger generations about the ration that defined the Army's worst menu choice. And if soldiers thought ham and beans were bad, the next innovation in field food might have been even more questionable: dehydrated potato flakes. They were supposed to mimic mashed potatoes, but often ended up looking and tasting more like glue. 7. Dehydrated potato flakes. Mashed potatoes, creamy, buttery, and smooth, were a comfort food many American soldiers had grown up with. On the farm table or at Sunday dinner, they were a symbol of home. The Army, knowing how beloved potatoes were, tried to recreate them in ration form. Their solution? Dehydrated potato flakes. What sounded clever in theory often turned into one of the least appetizing meals of the war. The process was simple. Potatoes were boiled, mashed, dehydrated, and ground into flakes. All soldiers had to do was add water to bring them back to life. On paper, it was efficient. Potatoes were heavy and spoiled quickly, but flakes were light, lasted for months, and could be rehydrated anywhere. To military planners, it seemed like the perfect way to stretch the familiar into the unfamiliar world of combat. But in practice, the results were grim. Without milk, butter, or cream, the mashed potatoes turned into a grayish paste that clung to the spoon like glue. The flavor was bland, sometimes chalky, and often carried the faint metallic tang of the tin it was stored in. Worse, if the flakes weren't mixed properly or if the water was cold, they clumped into lumps that looked more like wallpaper paste than food. Soldiers joked that you could patch holes in a tent with them. The emotional disappointment cut deep. Imagine a soldier, exhausted after days of marching, being promised mashed potatoes with dinner, only to find a soupy, tasteless paste sliding around his mess tin. For men who longed for family meals back home, this substitute felt almost cruel. It wasn't just the lack of flavor, it was the reminder of what was missing. Still, dehydrated potato flakes had their use. They filled stomachs, they traveled well, and they gave soldiers carbohydrates for energy. In moments of exhaustion, even a spoonful of glue-like potatoes could keep a man moving forward. And for all their failings, they represented the Army's attempt to deliver a taste of the familiar in an impossible setting. After the war, instant mashed potatoes eventually made their way into American kitchens in a much improved form with better flavor and texture. But for veterans who first met them in the 1940s, memory never quite softened. For them, potato flakes would always recall the mud, the mess kits, and the taste of something that fell far short of home. And if those potatoes were disappointing, the next ration was often downright unappetizing. Soldiers sometimes opened their cans to find greasy little links that promised more than they delivered. Vienna sausages. 8. Tinned Vienna sausages. Few rations stirred such mixed reactions among American soldiers as the tiny, pale cylinders known as Vienna sausages. Packaged in small tins, they were meant to provide quick protein in a compact, shelf-stable form. To the Army, they were a practical solution. To the men who ate them, they were often something else entirely, greasy, rubbery, and more unsettling than satisfying. Vienna sausages had been around for decades before the war, inspired by European recipes of finely ground pork stuffed into casings. But the wartime version stripped away nearly all the charm. The sausages were packed in gelatinous brine, often soft to the touch and strangely bland. Soldiers sometimes joked that they were meat-flavored candles. At first glance, the little sausages seemed like a treat compared to other rations. They were small, easy to eat, and different from beans or potatoes. But the taste quickly wore thin. Many men found them overly salty, with a rubbery bite that didn't quite feel like meat. Others complained that the sausages had a greasy film that clung to the mouth, leaving an aftertaste that water alone couldn't wash away. The emotional reaction was sharp. For soldiers who grew up on hearty sausages fried in a skillet, these pale canned versions felt like a cruel imitation. They weren't comfort food. They were a reminder of how far from home a soldier really was. Eating them cold from the can only made matters worse. Some soldiers forced them down for the calories. Others quietly traded them away for anything else, chocolate, gum, or even cigarettes. And yet, Vienna sausages served their purpose. They were compact, calorie-dense, and reliable in environments where fresh meat was impossible to find. They offered variety in a ration system where monotony was the norm, even if that variety wasn't always welcome. In the desperate days of a campaign, a tin of sausages could still mean the difference between hunger and survival. After the war, Vienna sausages remained on grocery store shelves, but for many veterans, they carried too many memories of mess kits and muddy trenches. Some swore they would never touch them again. Others kept them in the pantry out of habit. A strange reminder of how something so small could be both hated and necessary. And while Vienna sausages tested patience, the next ration offered a different kind of struggle. Soldiers craved it, needed it, but often found it tasted more like medicine than comfort. Instant coffee. 9. Instant coffee packets. For many soldiers, a cup of coffee was more than just a drink. It was a ritual, a small comfort that reminded them of home. During World War II, the Army needed to give men that comfort even in the harshest environments. Enter the instant coffee packet, a powdered, soluble version of the beloved brew, designed for convenience but often leaving something to be desired in taste. Instant coffee had existed since the early 20th century, but the Army refined it for battlefield use. Lightweight, easy to carry, and quick to prepare, it promised soldiers a warm boost of energy anytime, anywhere. A simple spoonful mixed with hot water could revive morale in the freezing nights of Europe or the scorching heat of the Pacific. Soldiers counted on it to start their days or keep them awake during long marches. Yet the reality was bittersweet, literally. The taste of instant coffee could be harsh, almost medicinal, compared to the rich, roasted flavor of fresh brewed coffee. Soldiers often added sugar or condensed milk when available, but more often than not, they drank it black and grimaced. Some joked that it could clean the rust off equipment, or that it was designed by scientists who had never actually tasted coffee themselves. Emotionally, coffee packets carried more than flavor. They carried routine and small reassurance. A soldier in a foxhole spooning the bitter powder into a cup of hot water could take a brief mental step back to a kitchen table at home, a neighborly diner, or a corner cafe. But the disappointment of the taste also reminded them of absence, the things they missed most during long deployments. Even a sip could be a small shock, a reminder that war changed the ordinary pleasures of life. Still, instant coffee mattered. It gave soldiers warmth on cold nights, energy during long campaigns, and a psychological lift in moments of fatigue. In some ways, it became a companion, a constant amid the chaos of war. Letters home often mentioned coffee, not for its taste, but for the simple ritual it allowed, a moment of normalcy in an otherwise unnatural setting. After the war, instant coffee became a household staple, but for veterans, the memory of those battlefield packets remained vivid. They remembered the bitter sips, the comfort it provided, and the small piece of home it represented, even when it fell short of expectation. And if instant coffee was an acquired taste, the next ration item was an outright challenge: hardtack crackers. Tough, dry, and nearly indestructible, they tested both patience and teeth. Hardtack crackers. If there was one ration that felt like a relic from another era, it was the hardtack cracker. Soldiers in World War II joked about them, but in truth, they were eating a food that their great grandfathers had chewed on during the Civil War. Simple, cheap, and nearly indestructible, hardtack had returned once again to feed America's fighting men. Hardtack was made from just three ingredients: flour, water, and salt. Baked until rock hard, the crackers could last for years without spoiling, which made them a dream for military supply chains. For the Army, they were a perfect filler food, light to transport, impossible to ruin. Here's the full expansion for 10. Hardtack crackers in the same nostalgic documentary style as Star 10. Hardtack crackers. If there was one ration that felt like a relic from another era, it was the hardtack cracker. Soldiers in World War II joked about them, but in truth, they were eating a food that their great grandfathers had chewed on during the Civil War. Simple, cheap, and nearly indestructible, hardtack had returned once again to feed America's fighting men. Hardtack was made from just three ingredients: flour, water, and salt. Baked until rock hard, the crackers could last for years without spoiling, which made them a dream for military supply chains. For the Army, they were a perfect filler food, light to transport, impossible to ruin, and dependable in every climate. Tucked inside sea rations, they were meant to provide carbohydrates and a bit of crunch alongside canned meat or stew. But soldiers quickly discovered the crunch was more like concrete. Hardtack was so tough that some men used it as poker chips or even carved it into keepsakes. Others softened it by soaking it in coffee or breaking it up into stew just to make it edible. Left as is, it could crack a tooth. Many GIs joked that the Army should issue dental insurance alongside the crackers. The emotional reaction was part frustration, part amusement. Imagine a young soldier, already weary from marching, pulling a cracker from his ration pack and realizing it was as hard as the butt of his rifle. There was humor in it, but also disappointment. Bread at home was soft, fresh, and warm. Hardtack was the opposite: dry, stale, and utterly lifeless. Eating it wasn't a pleasure, it was an obligation. And yet, hardtack had a purpose. It filled empty stomachs, kept well in every climate, and reminded soldiers, whether they liked it or not, that their hardships weren't new. They were part of a long line of American soldiers who had chewed the same jaw-breaking crackers in wars past. In a way, hardtack carried history within it, even if the flavor left much to be desired. After the war, most veterans left hardtack behind without a second thought, though some kept the memory alive in stories told at reunions. It became a symbol not of nourishment but of endurance, the kind of food that soldiers didn't love but survived on. And if hardtack was tough to eat, the next ration was just as tough in a different way: chocolate. Not the sweet comfort of home, but a tropical bar designed to survive heat and nearly impossible to enjoy. Looking back, it's easy to laugh at the bizarre meals soldiers endured in World War II: the concrete hard crackers, the slimy stews, the chocolate that no one wanted to eat, and of course, the dreaded ham and lima beans. But for the men who lived it, these foods weren't just punchlines, they were part of daily survival. Every ration told a story of scientists working late nights to invent foods that wouldn't spoil in the jungle, a story of factory workers packing cans by the millions, a story of soldiers trading, tossing, or forcing down whatever the army handed them. In the moment, the meals may have been frustrating, but in hindsight, they became symbols of endurance. For veterans, the memories lasted long after the fighting ended. Some never touched certain foods again. Others held on to a strange nostalgia, chuckling as they told their kids about chocolate that tasted like wax or beans that could stop a war faster than a bullet. These rations became part of the war's folklore, small but unforgettable details in the bigger story of victory. And that's what makes them worth remembering. War isn't only about battles, dates, and strategy. It's about the human experience, the fear, the boredom, the laughter, and yes, the food. These meals may have been shocking, unappetizing, or outright miserable, but they were also essential. They remind us that history isn't just written in blood and iron, but in bread, beans, and bitter chocolate. So the next time you see a can of Spam, a box of powdered eggs, or even a fruitcake that seems to have lasted decades, think of the soldiers who once lived on meals just like them. For them, food was more than fuel. It was survival, sacrifice, and, whether they liked it or not, a taste of history.